Well, great. You read the beginning of the abstract, which is actually the beginning of the presentation. How do I just advance?
Oh,
sorry.
No, sorry. Just click.
Just click on this. So indeed, we're going to tell you about our team taught course that we just finished teaching. We don't have the student evaluations from it yet. So it seemed like it was a great success to us. We'll see if we have any surprises. But it was a course taught at Wellesley just last semester entitled 6 Degrees of Marie-Antoinette, Social Networks in the French Revolution. And it was a course that tried to do a lot of things. Oh, I'm still not, sorry. There you go. So the first part of it was basically a traditional French course, the kind that I've taught for now 15 years, being a specialist of early modern France. So a course on the Ancien Régime, fictional, historical, political networks as a means of understanding the French Revolution. So in the past, I've taught courses entirely dedicated to just that part. But then we added this component that now that we're thinking about networks, we would think about them as a sociological theory and part of developments in digital humanities approaches. So the second component, the DH part, and then what you could call the third component, the hands-on, the practice of working with making digital humanities projects, understanding network theory as a means to analyze but also to do. And although it was an advanced level French course, so students had advanced level French, they weren't, most of them had no idea. We asked them on the first day of class, do you know what the digital humanities are? Most of them didn't. Some had taken one that I taught at the 200 level, but it was important that I put that in, that no previous knowledge was required, because I think students would actually have been turned off or wouldn't have been able to take the class if any kind of knowledge had been demanded. So we'll take you through the ups and downs of the course and how we ran it. And one of the very first challenges that we've encountered in doing these kinds of courses are the student expectations, that in the end, as interested as they may be in the French Revolution, they come to the class as French majors or as students of French who want to perfect their French. They want to just get better at speaking, writing, understanding French. And then they look at the selection of courses and they pick the one that seems the most interesting for them to do that. So they're used to, by the time they get to this advanced level class, they're used to what a French language class looks like. It's where you have readings, you read novels, you might read things on the web, you read all sorts of genres, and then you discuss them. You often have guided questions that you know what the discussion is going to be like, and then you come and you analyze orally in class, and then you go home and you analyze in your dorm, and you often have to write papers, final papers that involve secondary sources, but it's things that they've basically been doing in their English classes since high school and that they've been used to doing now in their French classes. And so we're really changing the expectations because we're giving very different kinds of assignments. And most of our assignments are dedicated to this notion of working with data. And so we found that our students greet that idea of working with data with varying levels of excitement. Some are, as most students now in the humanities are double majors. A lot of them are humanities and STEM or humanities and social sciences, so they're used to working with data, they're used to thinking about Excel spreadsheets. But we had 3 students who were humanities hardcore, who were French and English, French and medieval Renaissance, and they didn't necessarily think it would be a great thing to work with data, but they stayed on. We lost one student who said, no, I'm really here because I want to work more on my French writing. She left, but on the other hand, we gained a math and French major, who said, this is the class I really want to take because of this opening towards data. But then also, the challenge was the workflow. As I said, students are used to kind of the rhythm of a semester where you read your primary text, you discuss it, and then you work towards the paper. Here it was reading a primary text or becoming familiar with a digital platform, learning a tool that they were going to then have to use, and getting enough of an understanding of that historical context or of that reading to be able to ask interesting questions in the digital part, the digital practitioner part. And so, of course, that is the ultimate problem that we all face, even when we're not doing digital things, is time. And the notion, it often felt like it was a course and a half, like I was trying to give them the context, the cultural understanding, the linguistic aspects, and an understanding, nuanced understanding of the materials we were reading, but then also needing to master that tool and hopefully always critiquing the tool, saving time to be able to say whether or not the method was useful or not. So her face is the face we often made in terms of just feeling like you need to gallop. And I'll let you say about the tool.
So my role in this as co-instructor was I'm a I had been a research instruction librarian. Manage a team of research librarians. But we were, as we were proposing this course, trying to get students to be involved in visualizing these social networks that we were exposing them to. Various networks, both historical and fictional, that we'd be examining. And the tool that we had chosen to endeavor with this was Gephi, which is a tool for visualizing social networks, without necessarily turning it into a Gephi course, right? So letting the content lead the tool rather than the other way around. So that was something that took a fair amount of effort on our part. Another big effort that we had to engage in was just when you are engaging in social network analysis, right? With texts, you have texts that you can simply analyze. Those are there, and we can get them in shape for students to analyze those. Trying to find social network data for 17th and 18th century French topics, a little more difficult than it might be to find some other more modern data sets. So I found myself in my role as co-instructor trying to pre-build data sets that the students would be able to use so that they didn't have to get too bogged down in the elements of creating their own data sets. But all these times spent on tools and data were not necessarily spent on humanities learning, right? Those modes of humanities inquiry that are more traditional. So there's ways that you can address that. There's recognizing that these tools are things that can be engaged in critically. Ask what this tool, what the affordances of this particular tool are, and how what this tool lets us do and what it doesn't let us do. Asking students to engage critically in some of those things. But it's a challenge nonetheless, right? They still, to a certain degree, have to know where to click to achieve the thing that they are attempting to do when they're visualizing a network. And so we had some strategies for addressing that.
So the first practical solution that we found, and this was based on a first iteration where I had taught the class solo, and then Laura had been kind of a tech consultant, was that students felt that there was never enough room for both. There was never enough room to really dig into the primary text and then master the tools. So we decided that the solution would be from the get-go to divide the semester into these two different types of courses. So on Tuesday, I would lead the discussion entirely in French of the primary text, and would look very much similar to the kind of course that I had taught for the last 15 years. Although, as the semester went on, there was more and more allusions, crossover conversations. Laura, of course, was present on Tuesdays and could speak and make any comments that she wanted, but it was the sense that that class was dedicated to mastering as much as they could the content, the primary text. And then on Fridays, we'd have our hands-on DH day, where we would both look at platforms, we would look at the project planning, the students would do a lot of kind of atelier work, and those were bilingual. Those days were bilingual, where Laura, who understands French 100%, speaks it quite well, but might not feel most comfortable leading a DH course in French, would lead the conversation in English, would do demonstrations in English, but the students would speak at her in French and would speak to each other in French in what I told them resembled very much the kinds of workshops that I've seen in France, where it's plurilingual, we're moving in and out of languages, language is very fluid. Yes, there's a lot of Anglicisms and Frenchisms that blend, but overall there's a fluidity in the language, and they're using it in a very natural way. So this division of days made them kind of come in with expectations, and was easier for us as instructors to separate the content.
You may want to move a little quicker through this section.
Sure. Well, one of the things we did, because our feedback when I taught the first course was that they don't write enough. If you're doing all these projects, are you perfecting your writing? Are they perfecting their French grammar? And so a solution was to use this journal de bord, this regular writing exercise, where they would talk about their experience using the tools, they would talk about what they'd understood, and also kind of share affectively how it was going for them. So we were able to keep track of how they were doing, but then I was also able to comment on their grammar and have them focus on writing components. So just those two aspects.
Another thing that we were engaging in was, and I'm actually going to skip forward just really quickly, just to talk a little bit about the structure of the class. We did a series of projects over the course of the semester that were designed to scaffold their understanding of various social network concepts. So early on, this is a packed semester, 4 weeks. We start off with study of contemporary Twitter network, followed up by study of a historical network and a fictional network, and then a final project of their choice. We were trying to introduce the concepts of networks and the visualization tools like Gephi really early, so that one of the complaints that we'd had, or comments that we'd had, feedback, from an earlier 200 level course that Ellen mentioned was, wow, it would be really great, we were really excited to use this tool, but it would be great if we started it before November. And I said, okay, let's start at the beginning of the semester, and we can really, so that they can learn all of the affordances of this particular visualization tool. But a really key element was a transparent teaching design. So for every single assignment, outlining what the purpose of that particular assignment is, every element of the tasks that they would be expected to complete as part of this assignment, and crucially the criteria that they're going to be judged, not just that they're going to be judged by, but that they can know that they successfully achieved the point of this assignment. And so one element of that was this data visualization rubric that I developed, or adapted rather, from Polly et al., where every element of the visualizations that they created were going to be assessed, and they could, and they had, we in class would go through these rubrics, and they would apply it to visualizations that we provided, so that they had practice applying this rubric to various social network visualizations that we discussed in class. So that was a really key element of seeing how to then debrief those graded assignments after they'd had the experience of applying those criteria. So, study of a contemporary Twitter network. Twitter networks are easy to analyze. They're big, and they have a lot of nodes, and they're really easy to access. But then we moved on to historical networks, right? Now we actually got to try to look at some historical concepts. First, we had them critique a DH project. The Mapping the Republic of Letters, fantastic DH project that many of you are probably familiar with. There's one particular case study done by Dan Edelstein and Inada Casanova on Voltaire and his correspondence network. So we had them analyze that project, looking at how they achieved what they were looking at, and what humanistic questions they were doing, and what counts as evidence. If you're a digital humanities scholar, how are they attempting to make their point? This was all a means of getting them familiar with the data, right? Familiar with the 18,000 letters that they had as part of this assignment, because in the next part, we were going to have them adapt the data that at Stanford is made available, where they were going to manipulate those 18,000 letters with the people who were writing the letters and connecting them with the people who were receiving those letters for their own research purpose. But the point is basically just to be able for them to make an argument based on a data visualization. So in this particular case, they were able to make some visualizations about the various intellectual endeavors that different Voltaire correspondents were engaged in. But we found that not just network graphs were the key elements of visualization. So this particular student was making an argument based on how central Paris was to the members of Voltaire's network. So other forms of visualization we were easily able to accommodate as well. We moved on to a fictional network, the correspondence network of an epistolary novel, Liaisons Dangereuses, which you may be familiar with through Cruel Intentions or some other films. We had them look at that correspondence network represented by the various senders and receivers of letters. We also had them look at close reading the letters of one particular character, a very young, naive girl named Cécile de Volanges, with the idea that they would be applying this in a fictional context. So this meant capturing interactions between those characters through close reading of 25 letters. We split the letters up between the individual students, and each of them went into a Google form and tracked who initiated interaction, who received the interaction, what type of interaction it was, whether the interaction was lying or not, and if it was a conversation, who was the subject of that conversation. So this is actually a really rich data set. It lets us do some really cool things with language.
And so, indeed, they were each responsible for 2 letters, and we were responsible for letters as well. So we needed a project that could be doable over the course of this, basically 3 weeks that we dedicated to Acro. But what we found was how much the students had to engage with the language in trying to inventory the type of interaction that was occurring, so working between the primary text and the Google form. So they would read something, a sentence like Monsieur le Chevalier de Danceny, that fellow I told you about, and with whom I sang at Madame de Merteuil's home. So they would start with something perhaps very easy, inventorying the Monsieur Chevalier de Danceny, the fellow I told you about. So our speaker has told someone about Danceny, so that's very easy. You can put that into the Google form as Cécile telling Sophie about Danceny. But then you have this second interaction, with whom I sang at Madame de Merteuil's home. And so the student has to think about, well, what does that mean, with whom I sang? Is that an interaction? You're singing with someone? How would you capture that? And so understanding along the lines of Joanna Drucker, this notion of capta as opposed to data, where you have to decide, you have to make a call, and then inventory it according to a logic that you're respecting. But then you look at something like, there's only Madame de Merteuil with whom I speak freely when I speak of my love. So then they have to think of, well, speaking of my love, is my love Danceny, or is my love just love in general, the notion of love? And so they're thinking about how in French you say mon amour, and it's just speaking about a particular person, but it could also be a thing. So again, they had to engage with the language at such a deep level in this constant back and forth between the distant and the close.
I can say from personal experience, this will stretch your French. So they created some really fascinating visualizations. In this particular case, Cécile, the young innocent girl, is coming from a convent, starts engaging more with men over the course of her letters. Or alternatively, I'm going to skip over that one. But we come to the benefits and the challenges of trying to engage in this particular type of digital humanities work in a upper-level foreign language class. There's some really sustained engagement with the novel. They're getting some deep understanding of letter writing, of the epistolary genre, of some of the historical and fictional contexts, and a lot of practice going back and forth between close and distant reading. And most of all, and something that humanities students may or may not have thought a lot about, writing using data and writing using visualizations. We looked at examples of how scholars in their own digital humanists in their own writing were interacting with the visualizations, how they're referring to those visualizations, how they communicate. But the pace of this, this is a lot of feedback. These are a lot of assignments. We need to build in more room to breathe in this semester and in this presentation. So there were some other minor issues. There's always the eternal questions of, is there enough French in this class? Is there enough language practice? Should we be doing more group work? Should we be doing more, looking at more DH scholarship or more French scholarship? I think, I suspect that we're going to get some really good feedback in our SAQs, but it's been tremendously helpful for us. The key thing for me, just to wrap things up, is that in this course, the students are using French in a way that is not typical of the French literature classroom. So typically, in class and during the workshops, the ateliers that I was running, they were asking for technical help. They were describing a visualization. They were making comparisons and data. They were talking about their methods all in French, and these are things that don't typically happen in French. And there was a lot of group and collaborative experiences that humanities students don't do.
I think we can just end with that.
Yeah.
I think that's said it all.